Will you please state your full name for the record?
Yes, Megan Hancock.
Go ahead, Ms. Hancock.
Thank you. Trying to describe how my sister, Madeline Jane Kingsbury's murder has impacted me is impossible, and it will always be impossible. Living through the experience of having a loved one being an endangered missing person for 69 days until they are ultimately found dead, discarded in the wilderness, wrapped and duct taped into a bed sheet. How do I tell you how that has impacted me? For many days and nights while Madeline was missing, myself and my family, we couldn't eat, we couldn't sleep, could hardly look at each other or speak to one another. We were robotic. Before Madeline was found, those 69 days were absolute torture. The world continues around you. People go to work, they run their errands, they go on vacation, they spend time with their kids, but you're there frozen in time. Life doesn't continue for you until you've completed the mission that you're on, and that was to find Madeline. For months, we lived out of hotels and suitcases. I was out of work. We were away from our homes, our friends, any sense of normalcy. My days consisted of news and law enforcement interviews, trying to map out areas in the wilderness to search, endless cups of coffee in place of food, many tears, very late nights, maybe 3 hours of sleep, and then getting up to do it all over again. Our days were spent in fields and marshes, by rivers and creeks, in the bluffs and in forests, looking for any sign of Madeline. I watched my parents crumble and disintegrate and turn into shadows of themselves. Their eyes having that 1,000-yard stare and just empty, not knowing what to say or do and just being at a complete loss. How do I tell you what it's like to have Madeline's children have to tell them that we don't know where their mommy is and that she's lost? How do you explain that to two kids that are so young? How do you explain to them that they can't ever go back to the home that they knew and they will never live with their parents again? I was not the one to ultimately tell the children that their mother died. My father and stepmother took that burden, but I've certainly been there for the questions and the wonderings of a 3- and a 6-year-old, both about their mother and their father. I've been there to hear my 6-year-old niece say that mommy was too young to die. And I will always remember exactly where in my home I was sitting when my dad told us all that remains had been found, and they were 99% sure that they belonged to my sister Madeline. I'll always remember how I fell to the floor and I'll always remember the absolute feeling of emptiness in the days and weeks after. And how do I tell you what it was like to drive with my dad to accompany Madeline's remains to the funeral home where she would ultimately be cremated? I was in the same vehicle as her. She was right there. How could she be that person in the body bag right behind me? How can that be true? And how can I tell you what it was like to try to have a semblance of a goodbye through that body bag? Watching my father collapse onto her and say how sorry he was over and over again, and singing "You Are My Sunshine" to her one last time. I'll never forget the sounds he made of grief and sorrow. How can I tell you what it was like to feel how much of her was already gone, to hold her hand through the body bag, to know that she was right there. To know that if I did see her, that wouldn't be her anymore. How can I tell you what it was like to accompany her right to the end, helping to guide her into the incinerator because we refused to let her be alone anymore? I can't tell you what it was like. It's indescribable. In the aftermath, trying to piece my life back together, many aspects of my daily life and my being have been affected. I couldn't get a proper night's sleep. I still can't. I could hardly leave the house. I rarely spoke to anyone. I wasn't caring for myself on a base level. Intrusive thoughts, flashbacks. I started trauma therapy and was diagnosed with PTSD. This has affected my job and my ability to work as before, affected my physical, my mental health, my relationships with my husband, my family, and my friends. I was recently married, an event my sister Madeline should have been present for. She should have been there for the dress shopping, the planning. She should have been there standing right beside me as my maid of honor. And though my wedding day was one of my happiest days, but it was also one of my hardest. I didn't want to get married without her, but that choice was made for me by somebody else. That's one of the worst parts, is that we have no choice. Madeline is gone. Every holiday, every special event, every milestone, we have no choice. We have to carry on without her. The defendant made the choice to take her life, which he had no right to do. He made the choice to rob the children of their mother and consequently of their father as well. Sometimes, not very often, I do think of the defendant, and I've never truly hated anyone before. Some people have the ability to forgive and believe that it frees them and lessens their burden, and I can appreciate that. I will never forgive what he has done. And of course, I will never forget. And some would say that my hatred will eat me alive. I would disagree. The amount of space that the defendant holds in my mind is so small, it's minuscule even. The amount of space in my mind and my heart that I hold for Madeline is exponentially larger. The amount of pure love I held and still hold for my sister, Madeline, far outweighs the hatred that I feel. And the defendant will most likely proclaim his innocence for the rest of his life. Myself and my family and friends of Madeline do not need him to admit it because we all know the truth. Perhaps the defendant is happy with what has become of my family and what has become of Madeline, and to that I would say this: we are not broken. Madeline will forever be remembered and loved. Her children will know who their mother is and was. They will also know when they're old enough what happened to her, and that their father is the monster who took her from them. We will be there with them to carry them through the hard times and guide them through life as Madeline would have. And though the defendant's actions have shrouded us in darkness for a time, Madeline's light will never be extinguished. Her name and her loving, kind spirit will never be forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sonneman.
Thank you, Your Honor. Diana Miller, again, who's our Crime Victims Services Coordinator.